Easter, a time for fake grass, plastic eggs, these things, chocolate bunnies, and people dressed as bunnies. And then there are the weird parts of Easter, like fake grass, plastic eggs, these things, chocolate bunnies, and people dressed as bunnies, which is interesting. But what does all this stuff have to do with Easter? And if this holiday is about more than candy and wearing uncomfortable clothes to church and lunch with your relatives, what makes Easter happy?
What's up, everyone? Happy Easter. My name is Crystal Cox. For those of you who do not know me, I'm super excited to be here with y'all today. Now, I know it's not Easter Sunday just yet, but around here in my neighborhood and maybe even in yours, at every Walmart, every Target, and basically every grocery store, we've been ready for this holiday for months. No matter how you grew up celebrating, or if you grew up celebrating, you'd probably agree that for the most part, Easter is a happy time. Just think about it for just one moment. You are allowed to eat an unreal amount of candy, and every time I eat a Reese's egg, I think it's a happy Easter. People wear pastel colors. Most of the time, we'd be a little confused by so many pinks, greens, and even baby blues, although my favorite color is baby blue. But at Easter time, for some reason, it makes us all smile. We color eggs. Admittedly, it is the weirdest thing ever, but at the same time, so satisfying. And then we watch little kids hunt for them. How great is that? When I was young, I used to see little kids hunt for them because they were looking for the ones with the money in it. I don't know if any of y'all ever did that, but when I was a kid, that's what I was looking for. Parents force their kids to take photos with an oversized rabbit. I mean, an oversized rabbit, likely permanently traumatizing for them. And for me too, because my mom made me do that as well. All for an Instagram post. And you and I know we do the most when it comes to our Instagram post. In this series, we're going to talk about some of the reasons why Easter is such a big deal, particularly for people who are Jesus followers. If you're like me, growing up, you may wonder why Easter is even a thing. But during this series, we'll talk about not only what and why we celebrate Easter, but also why Easter should make all of us happy. But before we get there, let's talk about this last one for a second. Let's talk about the Easter Bunny, because we all want to know about the Easter Bunny. I still want to know about the Easter Bunny. Does this idea of a huge bunny seem like a strange tradition for a holiday? Or is it just me? Like, have you seen those pictures of those people in those weirded out bunny costumes with the kid that is terrified out of their mind? You know, I'm with the kid on this one. Now, luckily, your family probably won't make you dress up and sit with a giant bunny this Easter. And I think you all know, whether it's a giant Easter bunny or just something else, we all know that feeling of being, scared. We all know that fear can take away our happiness and almost faster than anything else in this world. We felt some form of fear since we were little kids, whether it was the monster in the closet, or maybe you're like me, you're scared of the dark and you thought it was always a monster under the bed. Fear can wreck our sense of peace and happiness. As you got older and hit middle school, your fears likely transferred to other things, like failing classes, being rejected by friends, being made fun of, feeling lonely sitting at the lunch table by yourself, or attempting to talk to someone you had a crush on. Sure, your fear looked different than when you were a little kid, but the feeling was still very real for you. And now you're in high school, and you've probably figured out that you don't just grow out of fear. No, as you grow up, fear kind of just like grows with you. Maybe you don't call it fear. Maybe you call it stress, or feeling anxious, or being worried. But no matter what you call it, you probably fear something. And listen, we all do. Maybe for you, it's like the fear of not amounting to anything or not having a real significance in this life, like the lack of purpose. The fear of the future, like what's ahead, your health, or maybe even the health of one of your loved ones. The fear of not fitting in, making the team, keeping up with your GPA, or getting into the college of your choice. Listen, whatever your particular fear is, you don't need me to tell you that it's a very big deal to you. The reality is that fear is on the rise. In fact, chances are good that in this room right now, With me, fear is determining the direction of a lot of our lives. We are making decisions to do and not to do certain things based on our fear. We are avoiding people or conversations that need to actually happen, maybe even this week, but it freaks us out so much we can't even do it. We are numbing ourselves for hours on our phones because we don't want to acknowledge the feelings of stress or fear we have on the inside of us. And whether we realize it or not, fear is fueling a lot of our thoughts and actions. Here's what's really interesting about all of this. If we were to boil it all down, there is one fear that connects all of our fears, and that's this: the fear of death. You may be thinking right now, wow, Crystal, you just took a dark turn. I'm afraid of getting a bad grade in history. I'm not sure about this dying thing that you're talking about. But this is not just about physical death, you guys. It's about the end of something. For example, think about it in relationship to some of the fears you have right now. We are afraid of really, truly being ourselves, and I kind of grasped at that because I have that fear too sometimes. Because we think that if people knew the real us, they'd freak out, run for their lives, and their friendship with us would just end. Their interest in being our true friend would be over. We are afraid of not getting into the college of our dreams because if our application gets rejected, it kind of sort of feels like we're then rejected and that our dreams are dead. We are afraid of getting busted or found out when it comes to some of the secretive stuff that we have harboring on the inside of us, because that would mean other people's perfect image of us would have to die. Whether it's physical death or the death of something we hope for, the fear of death comes down to losing something we think we'll never get back. And when you think of it that way, it's easy to connect almost all of our fears back to a fear of death. You see, death seems final. It's like fear's knockout punch that gives it victory. So if our fears come true and our friendships end, a goal isn't reached, a dream dies, and then all we have at the end of our lives is to realize that death defeats us all at once. That's just flat out devastating, not only for you, but for me, because there's no hope in that. There's nothing happy about that. But that's exactly where Easter comes in, right in the middle of our fear of death. And you know, as we head into this Easter season, and you may have heard the point of this whole thing isn't about just bunnies and eggs and chocolate, although all those things are great. For those of us who follow Jesus, this is a time of the year where we celebrate how he came to earth, died on a cross as a criminal, and then 3 days later, when nobody was expecting it, he rose from the dead. That's why Easter is such a big deal. It has changed everything, and it especially changed the life of a guy named Paul. Paul is one of the most famous Christians in history. So before he became this Jesus follower, he spent years trying to scare Christians into leaving the faith, using death as the ultimate threat. But then he met Jesus, like the used to be dead but rose again Jesus, and it changed everything. The guy who used to threaten Christians' lives became the greatest missionary of all time. He was shipwrecked, imprisoned, threatened, beaten, and bitten by a venomous snake. A venomous snake, y'all. But he kept going because he was so passionate about people understanding the significance of Jesus' death and resurrection. Paul's life was constantly in danger, and in fact, he was eventually killed for his faith. And despite all of that, Paul seemed to live without fear of death. And in one of Paul's letters, we can see why. Paul writes his letter to a church in an ancient city called Corinth. He reminds people that Jesus died and came back to life by his own power 3 days later. Just listen to what Paul writes. Death is swallowed up in victory. Oh, death, where is your victory? Oh, death, where is your sting? It's like Paul is taunting the very idea of death by reminding the Corinthian church that on Easter, death lost to Jesus. When Jesus died and then rose again, he defeated death. And that means that because of the resurrection, death can no longer defeat us. The power that death had over the relationships, reputations, futures, hopes, dreams, and even our physical bodies is gone, thanks to what Jesus did on Easter. We no longer have to fear any kind of death because Jesus destroyed death once and for all. You see, after Jesus hung on a cross and was placed in a tomb, it seemed like humanity's greatest fear had came true. Death was the ultimate thing to fear. To Jesus' closest followers, it seemed like death was final. The dream was over. But when Jesus walked out of that tomb alive, it proved that even the power of death wasn't strong enough to overcome the power of Jesus. This is why Paul was able to live the way he did, no longer fearing death. It's why he didn't seem to fear much of anything in his life after he encountered Jesus. He seemed to realize that the scariest things aren't the most powerful things. The things we fear don't have the same power that Jesus does. Paul trusted that the fear he faced were no match for the power of his resurrected Jesus. You see, if you don't remember anything else that I said, I want you to remember this. Easter means that fear isn't final. If Jesus can defeat death, he can defeat the thing you are afraid of too. Fear will try to convince you that it gets the final word, that at the end of the day, it will win. Fear will try to convince you that you are not good enough, that you will never have a purpose, and that maybe you will always feel worthless or that your life isn't worth it. Fear will try to make you listen and obey it. That's what power is all about. But here's the truth, students. Fear is only powerful if it can convince you that it's final. Fear will try to make you believe that nothing is stronger than what you are afraid of. But when Jesus defeated death itself, it showed us that nothing we fear is bigger than him. Nothing we fear is stronger than him. He showed us that fear, no matter what we are afraid of, doesn't get the final say. And you may be thinking, Crystal, you cannot tell me that it's because Jesus rose again that I don't have to be afraid of anything, even death. Because I'm still anxious, I'm still depressed, I'm still terrified of what's to come in my life ahead. Look, I completely understand. Even if fear doesn't get the final word, that doesn't mean there aren't still things to be afraid of. Real things, big things, and it's not a guarantee that something you are afraid of right now won't actually happen. But it does mean that you are more equipped to handle those things than you might realize. Paul says it like this: the Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. Stop and just think about that for just one moment. Paul is saying that the same power that defeated death 2,000 years ago when Jesus rose from the dead is actually inside of the people who believe in Jesus today. Maybe that's why Paul seemed to live free from so many of the fears we all typically face. And if you and I can embrace the significance of Easter in our own lives, maybe, just maybe, we could too. And when you have faith in Jesus, the power that brought Jesus back to life is inside of you as well. And that means fear doesn't get to tell you what to do. You may have walked in here today controlled by all sorts of different fears. Just know that if Jesus defeated death, the Spirit of Jesus who defeated death can live in you. Imagine what his Spirit can do in the face of the things you are afraid of. So let me just ask you this. Where has fear been holding you back from? Is it in your relationships? Maybe dreaming big about your future, going off to college, dealing with something concerning your mental health? Maybe you are afraid to just acknowledge it, doing something you know you should do no matter what it does to your reputation? Or maybe, just maybe, actually exploring faith in Jesus. Because up to this point, you've been afraid of how your life might change. Listen, however fear has been holding you back, with Jesus' help, you can take a step towards facing it today. What steps should you take to prove fear doesn't have power over you? And maybe it's forgiving someone, apologizing to someone, talking to your school counselor about something that you're going through, seeing a doctor and starting a conversation, telling your parents something you've never told them before, and maybe asking your small group leader for help with something you've been afraid to admit, picking a new friend group that's better for you, or asking honest questions you have about Christianity. This Easter, no matter what your step is, you can begin today by facing your fears because of what Jesus did. Because of what we celebrate at Easter, what Jesus did for us, fear doesn't get to determine the direction of our lives any longer. I don't know what your step is, but I do know this. If you are someone who believes that Jesus defeated death and you follow him, then you have his power on the inside of you. Because of that, you can handle whatever fear throws at you, no matter how scary it may seem. Remember, you are not facing fear by yourself. You are relying on the power of the one who defeated your greatest fear once and for all. He took away its power, its victory, and its sting. And that means that you don't have to worry about anything being more powerful than Jesus. This is the hope that the Christian faith was built on. This is what caused Paul to live free of fear. This is what makes Easter such a happy holiday. And while the rest of the world lives controlled by fear, driven by stress, you don't have to any longer. We are free. And that's just one reason why we can say, Happy Easter.